Hi, I'm Edwin from Center for Financial Professionals, and I'm here with...
I'm Jonas Jacobi. I'm the CEO and co-founder of ValidMind.
My first question to you is, how is GenAI different to traditional AI?
There are several aspects to GenAI that makes it slightly different than what we've seen historically from say, machine learning solutions. And I think if you're looking at a traditional AI solution, it has a targeted and smaller data set that it's trained on than if you compare it to a GenAI solution, which is trained on a much broader data set. It could be unstructured data and an extremely large set of it, right? And that makes it challenging for some companies or for consumers of it to understand what has it been trained on. Can I trust the information that it has been trained on, right? So that's one area. And then there are other aspects of it, like if we're looking at machine learning solutions, for example, that they're mostly developed internally. So if you're looking at in the banking industry, right, there are departments inside the organization that are building ML solutions for the bank or ML models for the bank. But when you're looking at GenAI, and particularly large language models, then most of them are developed externally. Because it requires a massive data set to train on, a massive amount of compute. And so that makes it harder for specifically smaller, medium-sized banks to develop that on their own. Doesn't mean that people won't be able to do that in the future, but right now, if you're looking at it, I think Bloomberg built their own, right? Sure. Lots of resources, brilliant people inside. They can throw money at that, right?
Definitely.
But for most people, that's going to be the difference, right? Okay, so now we have something that we have very limited control over, right? And we've even talked about AI and specifically traditional AI, almost like a black box, right? But compared to GenAI, GenAI is truly a black box. It's very hard to provide some explainability to why did it come to this conclusion, right? So that's one. And then in terms of if you're looking at the risk side and looking at governance, right? I think the difference there is that if you're going to look at what am I actually validating, right? I think that right now we're looking at ML solutions and even traditional statistical models as a model, right? Where I think as we move into the GenAI space, we're going to look at it more from a use case by use case basis. So instead of looking at governance as here's my model, here's my documentation. And sure, there's a use case associated with that model. Yes. I think for GenAI, it's going to be more pronounced that when we add something into our governance inventory, if I call it that, it's going to be a use case that we enter into, right? Where we provide input, output, and then we do an assessment of the results of the in and output, right? So make sure it performs the way we want. So that's the difference on the governance side. I think the other challenge I think a lot of the banks are struggling with or wrestling with is that it's the use, right? So if you're looking at a traditional model, right, it's been a very specific use case, right? You're targeting a very narrow path. And then with GenAI, it's sort of unrestricted. It essentially can apply to anything, right?
Yes.
And I think that is causing a little bit of concern inside the organization that, okay, how do we deal with this? Not just from a risk perspective, but also as an organization, right? Because where we historically have seen traditional AI being used has been predominantly by experts or subject matter experts, right? So targeting a specific part of the business. And now suddenly we have a new AI that is readily available to everyone inside the organization, right? Mm-hmm. So suddenly you have a little bit of a cultural transformation inside the organization.
Yes.
That you have groups inside the organization that has not been exposed to any AI risks or traditional risks around models that are now bringing in the use of AI in the form of GenAI into their daily work, right? And I think that's where we have a challenge as an industry. Like, how do we cope with that, right? How do we make sure that we help our peers and colleagues inside the bank understand the risks of using a large language model or a GenAI solution or ChatGPT, right? Just use a common, common brand, if you call it that way, that people use today. How do we make sure that everybody understands the risk, right? Because the ones that have been subject matter experts, they have been exposed to the regulatory requirements potentially and other risks related to that use of that model. Whereas people in, say, HR or marketing may not have been that exposed. And suddenly they have this powerful tool that seems to be doing magic. And how do we educate them? So I think a lot of that changed in terms of what's different from GenAI to AI, or from between AI and GenAI, is GenAI will have not just the transformative effect on the company, it can also disrupt parts of the business, right? Yes. And I think that's where we need to look at it and say, okay, how do we educate our peers with the right use? Similar to what we did with security, right? Now people have, we have security trainings that we have to go through on a, annual schedule, right? And I think we're going to see the same in terms of AI going into the next few years, right? That companies are going to realize, it's not just necessary to have a sort of model risk management practice that can deal with Gen AI models, but we also need to make sure that all our users are trained to understand that ChatGPT might actually not be correct all the time, right?
Yes.
So there's a little bit of training going on. And I think that, coming back to that again, right, one of the differences from a governance perspective is that we have very high expectations on, say, transparency and explainability of a traditional AI model. And right now that's unknown with GenAI, right? How much of that can we actually explain to a regulator and to a compliance officer, right?
So just touching on that, could you elaborate more on what concerns related to adoption of Gen AI models?
Yeah, I think that coming back to, we talked a little bit about the cultural change that might happen, right? So I think there's obviously concerns about data and data privacy, right? Especially if you're a bank.
Yes.
And we've heard that during your event here in London, that people are concerned about using a large language model that is operated by someone else outside the bank, and that we're sharing data. Now, there are solutions to that. Obviously, there's open source LLMs. There are, Microsoft, for example, offers an enterprise version of OpenAI.
Yeah.
So there are attempts to address those things, but that's obviously a concern, right? How much of our data are we willingly sharing with a company that is going to use that for to train and improve their data models, right? And I think that's one area of concern for a lot of companies. I think the other one, if you're looking at more organizationally, right? We know that Gen AI is going to transform and change lives inside the company, and I think what we've seen a little bit of is that, yes, as a risk organization, of course we understand that it's going to impact everybody else.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that is going to be important is that the risk organization also understands that we have to change with it.
Yes.
Right? And I think that's something that is a concern, obviously. How do we keep up with the progress, right? Because as soon as you open up the floodgates to a solution that is built on Gen AI, or the fact that the company is starting to see business opportunity or business benefits out of a new solution like Gen AI, it's going to be really hard to hold that back, right? Yeah. The floodgates have already opened up. Right now, it's up to the risk organizations and to help making sure that whatever we adopt inside a company is safe to use, right? And I think that's another concern I see in some of the banks that we are talking to.
So how are you seeing Gen AI adopted within financial service organizations?
Right now, I think the people are, at least the U.S. market in particular, right? They're starting to look at Gen AI as a tool to help organizations inside the company become more efficient, right? So you're looking at versions of ChatGPT with some guardrails on where you can help your staff become more efficient, right? So that would be information retrieval, summarization of reports, right? So where you can, you have a policy, you just want to get a summary of it, right? You can feed it in and you get a summary and it's going to be pretty close to what you want.
Yes.
But it again comes with that extra little thing you have to attach to it, which is training, right? So, what we see is there are definitely places on the operational side that a lot of banks are either experimenting with or are already in production with to help their staff become more efficient.
So what adjustments to model governance do you recommend for AI and GenAI adoption in financial institutions?
Well, we are a product company, so I wouldn't be in my best interest to not say this, right? I think for organizations, especially banks, right, to be able to keep up with the pace of the rest of the world in terms of adoption of AI. There's no doubt that GenAI is here to stay.
Definitely.
So right, so we know the floodgates are already open. Now it's just a matter of, okay, who's going to be in to win, or who's going to be the one trailing behind and potentially also lose out on a big chunk of the new market. And so I think from an organization and from a bank's perspective, very quickly figure out how can we effectively validate and test that our GenAI solutions are compliant with the potential regulatory compliance, right? We have here in the EU, we have the European AI Act, and then we have bank regulations like here in the UK, SS123, US SR117, and Canada now with E23. I think it's going to be imperative for banks to find solutions like what we offer at ValidMind that automates that process for them. Not removing the human in the mix, but helping the risk teams and the teams that want to build these solutions to be more effective in getting that product to production faster, right? And still safe. So I think that's going to be the main thing. The people that are going to be at the forefront of this in the next few years are going to be the ones that have modernized its own AI and model risk management practices and processes and using modern tools for that.
So how do you see the financial service industry stance evolving around GenAI and the large language models?
I think we're going to see, so I think cautiously first, a little bit. I mean, we have to recognize the fact that they're dealing with our payrolls, right? Yes. For example, it's our bank, it's our money, right?
Yes.
And so, we should be happy that they're taking this with a little bit of caution, right? And I think what we're going to see, and even within the past year, we've seen a massive shift inside the banks where they initially was, very concerned about this and pushing back really hard. Yeah. And some banks say, no, we're not going to accept this. And then in the just past 6 to 8 months, shifting quite aggressively towards the fact that, oh no, there are areas that we can safely deploy this with some guardrails and making sure that we train our users. Mm. So I think we're going to see a very rapid change in the usage of GenAI inside the banking industry. Mm. And I think and that comes a little bit with the fact that, a large portion of that is that the performance improvements on GenAI solutions overall is incrementally getting much better by the month, right? Yeah. And I think that is, at some point people are going to get to a point where, it's good enough, right? And as soon as that we tip over to that point, the adoption is going to accelerate rapidly, right?
So can you provide some critical considerations for the adoption of AI?
I think one thing I think is important for anyone really to consider, it's to not take a short-term view on GenAI. Yes. I think a lot of people, the initial reaction is, so this is bad, right? Or scary. I understand it. It's going to have a profound impact on your business. So it's a little bit scary. But I think what we need to do as an industry is take a long-term strategic approach to this, where we're looking at it, okay, back out a little bit. Let's not jump on this. We don't have to jump on it knee deep immediately, right?
Yeah.
But I think as an organization, we need to take a long-term strategic approach to it and sit down and say, okay, what parts of our business will be impacted by this? Whether us ourselves doing the work, or if someone from outside is impacting it by competing with us. Yeah. And take that stance, and then incrementally testing, right? This comes back to a little bit, but there was a conversation yesterday at on the panel and I think that's right? You don't have to be a massive research arm to test these things out, right?
Yeah.
You can incrementally test something, see if it works, fails, try another one. And I think that's what's going to happen, right? I think we're going to have to experiment, try till we'll find either an LLM that has evolved, far enough that we feel like it's good enough.
Yeah.
Or find use cases that we can solve already today, right? But it's imperative for companies to take a long-term strategic stance to this and look down like 2, 4, 5 years down and say, okay, how is this going to impact my business 4 or 5 years from now?
Yeah.
And then back into that and say, okay, when do we start? Where do we start? Because if you have a clear strategic path, it's a lot easier to address any challenges that you have on the way, right? Mm-hmm. And also give people some comfort that, okay, we have a path. This is how we're going to address this.
Obviously, ValidMind were here today at the AI and Financial Service Europe, and you were at AI Financial Service US last week.
Yeah.
How has that been for you? And please tell us a bit about it.
Great. We've been extremely pleased with the event. I think the topics have been very current. It's been the list of speakers have been phenomenal. I don't know how you guys are doing that, but very impressive list of speakers. And I think for us, the topics are relevant to what we are trying to deliver to our customers.
That's good.
And we also get to hear directly from your speakers, as well as the audience, what are their concerns? What are the things that they need help with now, but also long term? And, we pride ourselves in our ability to become a long-term partner with banks. We understand the pain that some of them are going through. We also understand that we need to be there for them for the long term and not just coming in and solve one specific problem right now. We know that there will be other things that they're going to have to address over the next few years.
Thank you very much. And
thank you.
Lovely having you at our event.
Thank you. It was great to be here.